You're watching KHQA This Morning. It's your news now.
Welcome back at 6:49. We are joined in just 1 second by the author of 4 books, including The Enemy Among Us. This is an account of the POWs during World War II in Missouri. David Fiedler joins us now. Good morning, David.
Hi, good morning, and good morning to everybody tuned in.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us so bright and early. Let's talk about the history of POWs in our area. Where did the POWs come to the Midwest?
You know, this is such an interesting thing because when we think of World War II, we think of stuff in Europe and in the Pacific, not around here, not Missouri, not Illinois, but yeah, actually our government sent thousands of prisoners of war. These are German and Italian soldiers captured and fighting overseas to our state, Missouri, to Illinois, to other states nearby, Iowa, all that you can imagine, and primarily because it was easier to keep them here than it was in Europe. We were trying to supply our army and use our men for fighting and not have to tie up everything, babysitting the men there and feeding them. And the second big reason, Hannah, was that we really had a need for their labor. While they were here, we were able to put them to work on farms and factories and help offset some of the shortage from the American men who had been called off to the war.
And David, how were they treated while they were in our area?
What's so surprising about this to a lot of people is that, when you think of prisoner of war camps, you think of places that are pretty grim. And, the movies show, beatings and malnourishment, all that stuff. But here it was very, very positive. Certainly they were still prisoners of war, and most of them would have preferred to be back at home with their families and away from the war. But while they were here, they were fed well. They had opportunities for recreation. The people that they met, ordinary residents of our area, although there may have been some apprehension or suspicion at first, soon came to realize that these men, in large part, were friendly and decent people and just glad to be out of the war, and working with them side by side every day gave them the chance to know them as people, as opposed to our enemies from the fight that brought them here.
Which, when I first was thinking about this, I thought, how people in our area would respond to their presence would maybe be kind of negative, but that's kind of influencing it different.
Well, you're right. I mean, there was a learning curve, too. When you see German soldiers, and these were German soldiers, and including some true Nazis among them, people said, what are we doing here? Is it really safe to have these soldiers here? But what people realized pretty quick, Hannah, was that, a small fraction, maybe 20%, were true hardcore Nazis bent on causing problems. And once our government realized that and separated those men from the group, the larger population were just ordinary soldiers who had been drafted into the war and wanted to serve their country, felt the same kind of loyalty and love for their country that other people do, but, were glad to pass the time until they could get back home with their families. And so over time, things settled down and they worked and, again, had opportunities for recreation, and people began to see them a little bit differently.
So with that being said, was there any account ever of them trying to escape, or did any of them actually escape?
They had lots of opportunities. In Hannibal, for instance, the prisoners were housed in the ball field in the city park. I mean, they literally set up tents there in the outfield, so it wasn't like there was high security. And in Louisiana, there was a former work camp from the Depression area that they lived in, and they would be working across the orchards with maybe 100 men out in the field, and one guy guarding them who's asleep under the trees. So there were lots of opportunities, and every once in a while people would sneak away for a couple hours, but usually if it was a serious attempt, a night in the woods with nothing to eat, and chiggers and ticks, meant that they would find a farmhouse in the morning and bang on the door and ask to be brought back home. So plenty of opportunity, no real escapes, not at least in the area there where we are.
David, you already are an author of 4 books. What else are you working on currently?
Well, we've got the history of these prisoners of war, and then a historical fiction, a novel that goes with it that just came out this fall. There's some possibility. People who read it, Hannah, say, "Oh, this should be a movie." And of course, something like that is interesting, but always a kind of a far possibility. But there's some thought about that, or maybe taking pieces of the story and making it into a stage performance, a play, or something like that.
Well, we will keep our eye open for that. That would be really great to see come through. David Fiedler, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, taken.